Well, good morning, everybody. It is December 23rd, 2020. Hope everybody's doing well and getting ready for your holidays, which is important that you don't spoil or slow down or any other reduction in your overall happiness. Enjoy this Christmas. We probably need a good Christmas more than anything, more than any year I can remember, certainly. And I will be here Christmas Eve and tomorrow, which is as we record this on Wednesday, and I'll be here Christmas morning too. We had an enormous inrush of members, and a number of you made one-time donations, which is deeply appreciated. And so I'll be here Christmas morning with a Christmas message. It'll have essentially nothing to do with politics, he says, and we can celebrate together, and then we'll get on with next week, and after that, 2021. So today's episode is China 2020. I don't expect. Never know. But I don't expect to be talking about China anymore this year, but I suspect we're going to be talking about them an awful lot in the next several years. One of the things that I want to talk about in 2020 is sort of the big picture. By the way, if you ever make a donation to like a Republican Senate race or anything, it's really worth every penny, even if you donate a dime. I get texts 4 or 5 times an hour. Hey, it's Newt Gingrich. Hey, it's Ted Cruz. Hey, it's Kelly. Hey, it's Mike Pence. They make it absolutely impossible for me to make another political donation anytime in my life, and there's no way to turn them off. But I digress. So I think we could just take a big look at the situation with China as 2020 draws to a close, because our relationship with China, if things go the way they appear to be going now, I still have some Hail Mary hopes, but nevertheless, which those hopes involve China too, by the way. Nevertheless, I think it's probably a good idea to look across the board at some of the things that China has done this year, things that they've stated that they're going to do, and what the American position is going to be relative to China as it looks now at the end of 2020. I maintain my solid commitment to not reporting anything that doesn't have a pretty well-researched factual background. And there's been so much rumor and hearsay regarding this election, regarding the Wuhan virus, regarding all of it, that you really have to dig deeper and deeper almost every day to really get to the truth of things in terms of somebody makes this claim. What's the counterclaim? You always have to look at the counterclaim. Sometimes the counterclaim utterly demolishes the original statement, and sometimes the counterclaim itself is so weak and so off target that it vindicates the original statement. But it has been a year where China has made some very big moves, and I personally think the evidence for these things are incontrovertible. The evidence for one of them greater than the evidence for the other, but I wouldn't put it past them. First thing I'd like to say about China in 2020 is we found ourselves in the same position with China in 2020 that we have with Iran for the last 41 years, since 1979. We're not at war with China, and we haven't been. And we're not at war with Iran either, but they're at war with us. And this is part of the generosity and fundamental friendliness and decency of the American population that provides us with so many benefits, but it sure does lead to us being awfully naive throughout our entire history, and utterly surprised when these Pearl Harbors or 9/11s happen, and then we have to become the Americans we are deep down, which is considerably less nice, and it's certainly not our natural state, and we like being friendly, but we always get taken advantage of for it. So of the things that I mentioned in terms of evidence, there are 2 things that I saw this year that I think had profound impact on the relationship, not only between the United States and China and the world, but also the future of this country. The first one, of course, is the Wuhan virus. There is some compelling anecdotal evidence that I've seen from several sources that seem to be reliable, that state that there are elements in the COVID-19 genome structure that are essentially cut and pasted gene sequences from other viruses, including HIV. I've heard this from several different people. Now, this one I don't have any solid evidence of, so we're just going to call that a rumor. But what I do have solid evidence of, and is available on the internet if you search hard enough, is over the course of the last at least 10 years or so. There was a woman scientist from China, whose name eludes me now, who gave repeated talks, like TED Talks, in front of large audiences, talking about how hard she was working to incorporate bat viruses and bat genetic codes from viruses into a virus that could bond with human cells. And I didn't make that up. I saw that with my own eyes. I saw her lecturing on her efforts, her ongoing efforts to basically splice bat viruses together into a form that could be transmittable by humans. And you can find this on the internet as well. If you look on YouTube, just Chinese scientist bat virus ought to do it. So when the Communist Party of China announced that, yes, this mysterious ailment had indeed originated in China, and when the entire city of Wuhan became afflicted with it, and there was no longer any way that they could lie themselves out of it or deny it, they shut down travel to other parts of China because they didn't want that virus spreading to other Chinese cities, because they knew what it was. They knew very well what it was. They knew it was an airborne virus that could cause serious respiratory distress and death. So they locked down Wuhan to the rest of China, but they didn't lock down the rest of the world. In other words, if you wanted to leave Wuhan and fly from Wuhan to Beijing, there were at least several days, and I think it was probably several weeks, where you could fly from Wuhan to Los Angeles, but you couldn't fly from Wuhan to Shanghai or Wuhan to Beijing. That alone is an act of war as far as I'm concerned, because it shows culpability, and it shows I forget the actual term, where you are essentially covering up evidence. It's an awareness of the crime. It's not an accident. If they had allowed all travel to continue, you could make a case that they just didn't realize what they had. If they had allowed no travel to continue, you could make a case that they didn't know what they had. But the actual on-the-ground fact that the Chinese government shut down travel from Wuhan to other parts of China significantly before they shut it down to the rest of the world tells me that there is no other rational explanation for that other than the fact that whether they released this thing on purpose or not, or however it got out of that lab, or even got into the population, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt for this particular argument all the way. There's no question that they allowed this to spread, and in my opinion, I don't see how that's any different than a biological warfare attack. And you can say, and maybe it's true, that they didn't do this on purpose, but nevertheless, they did completely obscure everything. A few, and this needs to be said and remembered, a number, 1 or 2, 3 or 4 maybe, Chinese scientists did release the genetic code for this virus, which they seem to have pretty much on hand, very early, and that has helped us quite a lot. But that was at their own personal cost, and some of those people have disappeared. So, as in the voter fraud issue, the evidence, when people say, what's the evidence? The evidence in the voter fraud issue is that 5 states stopped counting for several hours. That's the evidence. The evidence of the activity is the evidence. I don't have to show you a forged ballot. That alone, 5 states and so on, that is evidence. And the Chinese allowing people to travel outside of China but not inside is also evidence. Now, in Wuhan, China, they have claimed that the virus started from a so-called wet market. Wet market is a traditional Chinese kind of a market where basically the animals and insects and everything else that they eat is live. And it just sits there, and if you want a chicken or a dog or whatever you want to eat for breakfast or lunch or dinner, it's sitting there in a cage. They either kill it for you right there, or you take it home, but the blood drips everywhere, and it is a virus factory. It's virus Eden. There's no better way to spread viruses than mixing all of these bloods and fluids from all these different species, many of them brought in from what I'll just call the bush. And it's a compelling source, compelling origin for this virus. In other words, it's a very believable cover story. And look, that may in fact be true, but I have my doubts, because something like 400 or 500 feet, not kilometers or miles, feet away from this wet market is the Wuhan Virology Center, which is China's top biological virus research lab. It is their top biological weapons lab in the country. And it's about 400 feet away from where they claim this virus epicenter was. I find that a bit of a coincidence, to be honest with you. And the fact that they went in there and immediately sterilized the entire wet market, just basically hosed it down with bleach, and killed everything, is not what you would do at a forensic crime scene if you wanted to find out where this virus came from and how it was traveling and so on and so on and so on. So basically, they destroyed whatever evidence there may have been. I personally, based on the evidence that I've seen, on the evidence that I've seen with my own eyes of Chinese scientists talking about splicing bat DNA and human DNA, about the proximity of the Wuhan lab, about the idea that there had been leaks before in the Wuhan lab, and I don't think it's trivial to say that there were no bats for sale in that wet market. The nearest bat in the wild to the Wuhan wet market, my understanding is 900 kilometers away. So the case for the wet market gets weaker and weaker, and the case for the lab is stronger and stronger and stronger. Now, did they release this thing on purpose? I suspect that they did not, but it's possible that they did. Donald Trump finally, after 30 or 40 years of being just economically and culturally and scientifically raped by the Chinese, there's no other word for it, just these unbelievable deals that put America at a constant disadvantage. This ongoing, perpetual 30, 40 years of industrial espionage where Chinese spies have basically stolen American technology. That's been going on for decades. All of it's been going on for a long time. And Donald Trump came in and put a stop to all of that. And that's China's livelihood. That's what they need in order to survive. Now, before we get too far into the conspiracy weeds here, I always have to come back to what is actual evidence, what is evidence that I've seen with my own eyes, not anecdotal evidence. What have I seen with my own eyes? One of the things I've seen with my own eyes was a military paper that was published, I think it was in 2020. It was recent if it wasn't 2020. And it was a strategic analysis of China's position relative to the United States, because they're at war with the United States, and they have been since at least Korea, and really essentially since the beginning of the People's Republic. And this doctrine, this war doctrine, has printed on it an extremely believable and disturbing conclusion. And what the final analysis of this Chinese internal, it's not a secret document, it is an internal policy paper designed for the People's Republic of China Army and the People's Republic Army Navy. And it basically says, in so many words, that currently China cannot compete with the United States militarily, and so in order to achieve worldwide dominance, they will do anything necessary in order to achieve either that parity or superiority. And that we need to underline, anything necessary. There's a lot of things that the United States could do right this second. Biologically, nuclear weapons, all kinds of things. There's a lot of things that if I was president of the United States that I would want for this country and I think would improve our strategic situation. But I'm not going to do anything in order to achieve those things because I don't have to. Because I have confidence in my nation and don't carry around this enormous inferiority complex. But they said anything necessary. So, given the fact that the economy in the United States was booming, China was taking a beating finally, companies moving out of China at the behest of Donald Trump and coming back to America and bringing their manufacturing jobs with them. I'm going to cut to the chase here and I'm going to say something that is probably going to find, some people are going to find offensive, but I don't care because I think this is it in a nutshell. And by the way, I don't want to hear about how I'm exceptions to what I'm saying during this hour, because every time you talk about something as large as the structure and relationship, strategic relationship of nations, of course there are exceptions. To argue the exception is to grant the rule in most of these cases. But if you really want to look at it in a nutshell, really get down to the brass tacks of the relationship, is that China makes our stuff. China makes stuff that we design, and then they import it to us, and they take our money because they have incredibly severe labor laws and restrictions, and people jumping out of buildings and suicides at Apple plants, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. But they make our stuff. I don't think there's anything in my house or yours that was invented in China. Almost everything nowadays is made in China, but almost none of it is invented in China. I can't think of a thing really off the top of my head. I know there are Japanese cars on the road out there, and I know I have like IKEA furniture and other examples of things from Britain, France, and Germany, and so on. But I don't know of anything that was designed in China that I own. I know, as I said, many things that are made there. And so they make our stuff. And so when Donald Trump essentially says, well, I'm going to stop the process of you making our stuff, and we're going to bring these factories back, and I'm going to offer tax incentives or whatever it takes, and we'll make our own stuff. That is a death sentence for the Chinese economy. And the Chinese Communist Party, which has brought genuine prosperity to its people through this enslavement of them, but nevertheless, is now looking at a situation where they have 1 billion plus people whose standard of living may start to decline precipitously. And that is not something that an oligarchy ever wants to do, especially given the growth and the advancement of China in such a short period of time. So the Chinese Communist Party is looking at a suddenly very bleak situation because for the first time in 50, 60, 70 years, there's an American president who understands the risk that China poses to this country, including things like electronic parts that go into our military components that are made in China, medicines that are made in China. We'll get to that. And so they are looking at Donald Trump is an existential threat to the Chinese Communist Party, an existential threat to them, because he is appealing to American sense of patriotism, and more than that, their sense of self-interest, which is what you should be appealing to, and offering Americans a chance to have factory jobs come back to America. That's the end of China. And if somebody got serious about the cyber warfare thing and prevented them from stealing any more industrial secrets, that's the end of their innovation in most areas too, with an exception, and I'll get to that too. So the stakes are high for them. And when you have a document that says that we will do anything necessary in order to achieve parity or superiority over the United States, when I see an official document like that that is product of the Chinese government, then I'm going to do what I did when I read Mein Kampf and the Communist Manifesto and all of these things. I'm going to assume that what they're saying is true because they're saying it to themselves. So, does that mean that the Wuhan virus was released intentionally? I don't know. But I do know this. It would be difficult to design. Now, this is where we get into the realm of speculation. I cannot stress this enough. There should be a light on behind my shoulder that flashes whenever I feel like I'm talking about speculation, because pretty much everything I've said so far is based on actual fact, observable fact. But with the speculation light flashing here, it's hard to imagine a virus that would be better designed to disrupt the economy of the world without doing enough genuine fatalities, tens of millions of hundreds of millions of people, that kind of thing. It's kind of perfectly suited to shut down an economy, especially a free economy, without killing off so many people that all of a sudden you're screaming for war and somebody's head. Now that actually could be a coincidence. And given their control procedures and how error-prone they could be, I think the most likely case is that virus got out of there accidentally. But I am 100% convinced that it came from the Wuhan virology lab. I'm 100% convinced of that. And I am highly convinced, although not 100% convinced, that virus was engineered. And again, so far so good. We have engineered viruses as well, not just, I don't know if we have any more biological weapons, but nevertheless, all of genetic research involves changing genetic structure. So that's not in itself a problem. But if you're so sloppy that it gets out, and then once you're aware it's out, you don't say anything about it while there was still time to contain it. And in fact, once you're aware it's out and how serious it is, you immediately protect the citizens of China and don't even go to the simple act of protecting the citizens of the rest of the world. By the way, do you know why Italy took so many horrendous deaths in the first few weeks of this virus exploding? It's because there were large numbers of Chinese workers in Italy working on a number of specific tech and engineering problems. That is a crime of first-degree magnitude, in my opinion. That is a first-degree crime. There's a difference between an accident where you're driving down the road and either the car stops before you're ready or you weren't paying attention or whatever, and you ended up killing somebody or a lot of people. But there's a difference between that and driving a car into a group of people. And when you start talking about shutting down travel to China and leaving it open to the rest of the world, specifically the United States. I don't know what the number was. I want to say it's 5,000 people a day coming into Los Angeles from China after the outbreak of this. That number sticks in my head, but it's a significant number. Then you have to start asking yourself, is this is not the act of a player in the community of nations. This is not what a country that feels itself part of a greater planet does. I'm as against world government as anybody. I think it's a horrible idea. And I think the UN proves that all the UN does is, instead of elevating, criminal countries, all it does is pull law-abiding countries down to their level. When you have Iran in charge of women's commissions and Cuba in charge of things like election security, although, frankly, given what we saw in 2020, I wouldn't mind having some Cuban advisors here for that particular election. So you have to ask yourself, this looks an awful lot like a country that is not only at war with us, but at war with the rest of the world. But I don't think it was aimed at the rest of the world. I think they saw this as an opportunity. I think whether that virus was released on purpose or not, and I'm strongly inclined to think that it was not. But once it was clear to the CCP that it was out and infecting Wuhan, and they realized we have a pandemic here in China which we can contain conceivably, and we can certainly, almost certainly, keep within the borders of China, but it's going to spread within China. I think they made a decision and basically said, well, I know they made a decision. It's not up to me. This is not my opinion. This is what actually happened. They knew it was airborne, they knew it was there, and they allowed people to travel overseas when they didn't allow them to travel domestically. That's evidence, it's incontrovertible evidence of them basically seeing this as an opportunity for themselves. And guess what? That's exactly what it was. Not only did it shut down the U.S. economy, but it gave the unprincipled traders, and that's the only word for them, the unprincipled traders that make up what used to be the mainstream news media, now the news suppression media, it gave them a constant weapon to bludgeon Donald Trump with. Donald Trump shut down the U.S. economy based on a single computer model from Oxford University by one scientist that predicted that there would be 600,000 dead in Britain and 2.2 to 2.5 million Americans dead if he didn't do something right now. And so he did. And so people are saying how he's murdered 300,000 people. I'm not going to get into that because that's an entirely different issue. I still want to stay on the subject of China, but in any event, they did let that virus out. There's no question that they let it out. That's incontrovertible. So that is an enormous risk. That is a gigantic, enormous ploy by a country that I cannot see any sane reason for a country to take that kind of risk unless they felt like they were facing an existential threat. And that's what I think Donald Trump was to them. And then the second gigantic ploy was the U.S. election. Again, this is going to be a separate topic and probably multiple topics. But again, I have personally seen compelling evidence to say that hundreds of millions of dollars, $400 million in one case, shifted to the software company that's associated with the Dominion voting systems, and that you can trace almost all of this back to China. Huge amounts of money. There's no question that Chinese communist officials said that once Biden had been declared the winner by the newspaper, that we have friends in the White House now. There's no question that Hunter Biden is being paid for influence by the Chinese and other governments. And something needs to be said about this Hunter Biden thing, by the way. You can look at Hunter Biden and think, oh, the guy's just a complete loser and a coke addict and all the rest of it, and he is. But people don't pay money for nothing. And they don't keep doing it. So when people say, well, there's no evidence that Biden knew anything about it. No, the evidence that Biden Senior, that Vice President Biden knew something about it, the evidence of that is that Hunter Biden continued to get paid. Because if Hunter Biden couldn't deliver Joe Biden, then Hunter Biden is finished. He doesn't have a job as an international power broker. And since he's continued to do that, that's because he delivers the goods. And we all know it. It's all on the laptop that was suppressed by the press and so on. So they took a second big risk, and that risk was to put significant fingerprints on changing the outcome of the United States election. You know, I never thought about it till this very, very second. But for those of you that are history buffs, you might appreciate this. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, a lot of Americans thought, well, they must be insane. Are they out of their minds? Why would they do that? Why? And the reason that the Japanese attacked the incredible industrial might of America was because their oil resources were being choked off, and they felt that they had no choice. Imperial Japan launched that attack on the United States because they felt that if they didn't, they were finished. That the United States embargo on oil and all the rest of it, and the Washington Treaty limiting the size of their navy, that all of these things were going to put Japan out of business as an empire, And they took the risk to attack Pearl Harbor because they were desperate. And a desperate government, especially an autocracy, one that's an autocracy, one that is not representing the will of the people and subject to change of the wisdom of the people, will do strange things like this. And I think that's exactly what happened. I know it's what happened in the case of Japan. And I hadn't fully realized it until just now, but I'm quite sure that that's exactly what happened with China in 2020. I think they used the Wuhan virus, as a lever. I don't know if they did it intentionally, but once it was clear that the lever was in their hands, there's no question that they used it. And there's no question that, in my mind, that they interfered massively in overturning the American people, the will of the American people to reelect Donald Trump as president. And they did that because Donald Trump was an existential threat to them. And so far, as we sit here on December 20th, they've succeeded. Kamala Harris has ties to Chinese energy companies, and I could do this all day, and I'm sure I will in future episodes. Dianne Feinstein had a driver of her car for years. Her chauffeur was a Chinese spy, and she just is having a nice conversation about national security issues. It's an hour and a half to get to the airport. I used to be a limousine driver, by the way. I know how this works. Good limousine driver knows when to talk and when not to talk. Good limousine driver knows when somebody wants to make conversation to pass the time, when they want to be left alone. And any kind of an agent could figure out very quickly that the smart play is to become the kind of driver that Dianne Feinstein wanted around. And then when she got bored and started wanting to talk about things, which she continues to do in her dotage, which is another quality shared by so many Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, and Dianne Feinstein, all of them, none of them would pass a fundamental test of mental acuity and effectiveness. Not one of those three. And now we find out that this guy whose name eludes me, Stilwell, I don't remember his name because it's not the kind of name I want to remember, but a Democratic representative who's accusing Trump of colluding with Russia. Turns out he's sleeping with a Chinese spy, and that girl gets around, by the way, Fang. She's been hooking up with a bunch of desperate Democrats, and none of this is up for discussion. So that's a recap, I think, a general recap of China in 2020. And now the question is, how does it look for us going forward? We need to take a look at what our positions between the two countries are as we enter what looks to be a terrible phase for America, where not only are we going to lose the small but significant ground that we gained, but we can pretty much count on our defenses being down for the next 4 years, and if this voter fraud is not dealt with by the American people running for office, local office, and changing election laws, if we don't do that, then this just becomes, perpetual, and I'm not going to let that happen, and you're not either. Now, I continue to say if because I'm an optimist, but if Joe Biden is inaugurated as president on January 20th. We know that he is already in China's pocket to the degree that he's taken money from them through Hunter. I think that's proven beyond any doubt. We know Kamala Harris has financial ties, huge financial ties to China. So does her husband, all the rest of this. So let's get it over. We know what we're talking about. At the very, very least, this is an extremely pro-China administration. They're already talking about cooperation, especially in space flight, where we still have an enormous lead. Elon Musk and SpaceX are American ingenuity at its best, doing things that no other country in the world could do. China can't do what SpaceX does. Russia can't do it. Europe can't do it. And the U.S. government can't do it. But if the president and the policy of the United States is in order to share that technology, that's going to be a tough thing to overcome. I mean, it's entirely possible. In fact, you can almost say it's likely that if they're committed to sharing this technology with China as a payback for the money they spent on him stealing the election, then the United States government would have the legal authority to say, you either share this technology with them or we're going to revoke your contract with NASA, and we're going to revoke your launch license. And they can do that. So what is the situation between the two countries in terms of the strategic outlook on the face of the planet? When I did a video on American exceptionalism back in 2010, I talked about 4 areas where America was dominant and exceptional. And by the way, for your own benefit, we are still dominant in all 4 of these areas, although not nearly as much as we used to be. Nevertheless. And the 4 areas I chose were cultural, scientific, military, and 3 areas that I chose: cultural, scientific, military, and economic. So let's just walk through those. Economically, China has leveled out. Their incredible exponential growth curve has flattened. That's good news for us, only because China requires constant growth to keep its people contented, and as that growth starts to level off, and already the damage that Donald Trump has done to the Chinese economy is starting to show, that's not good for China. They're not in that growth curve that they were 10 years ago. Now they're going to have to start dealing with explaining to a population why that growth isn't continuing, and a richer and richer population. And we're going to start seeing now coming onto the scene 2nd generation and perhaps even 3rd generation Chinese kids who've been raised in prosperity, unlike their parents. As a quick aside, in 2000, I was working on this when 9/11 happened. In 2001, I was working on a documentary. I was a film editor, TV editor back then. I was working on a documentary on China. It was a 10-part documentary. And I had one part was the Moon Festival, and I forget what the second part was. But they had footage that I had to deal with as an editor. And some of it was from 1995, and the rest of it was from 2000. And you couldn't cut the two together. I mean, it was that profound. The footage from 93, 94, 95 was people in Mao jackets in stone buildings with dirt floors. No exaggeration. By the time you got to 2000, you got people in business suits and cell phones and Mercedes and all the rest of it. So all of the disadvantages of a generation that's raised in prosperity and has known nothing but prosperity has been afflicting us for 2 or 3 generations now. But we're going to see the first of this in China, and that's also good news for us, because we saw it in Japan. After the war, the Japanese that had grown up during the war, survived the war, and then lived in the after-war years, the company men, worked like rented mules, lived in the offices, put in 16, 17-hour days, just unbelievable work ethic that powered that entire Japanese economic miracle that lasted right through the 90s and into 2000. And then their kids were lazier, and their kids don't do anything. They don't have sex, they don't leave the house, they don't want boyfriends or girlfriends, they want to watch anime and play video games and sleep with their anime pillow cushions that have been printed with their favorite cartoon character. So China's going to start to feel that too. The United States showed, in the brief period of time that Donald Trump was president so far, in the 4 years, the United States shows what we're capable of doing if we cut the binds that tie us down, if we unshackle the manacles that we put on our own hands and feet. We are without question the economic powerhouse of the world, continue to be. All of the big inventions of the world continue to come from America economically. I'm talking about economic things now, not science so much. And despite how genuinely evil they are, things like Facebook, Google, Apple, all of these things are American companies. Nobody's using Chinese-built computers, and that's the way it is. So Joe Biden's going to raise taxes. That's going to slow down the American economy. He seems committed to this Green New Deal, which is going to cripple American energy production. The advantage that we had when Donald Trump was president, and presumably, hopefully, he will be president again, but we don't know the answer to that. But nevertheless, as energy prices in the U.S. dropped due to American ingenuity in fracking, we went from being dependent on Middle Eastern oil now to being an export. The United States is a net exporter of oil and natural gas. That's inconceivable to somebody who remembers the oil crisis of the 1970s. It's inconceivable, but that's exactly right. We have more available fossil fuel energy available to us now than we did when we first struck oil in Pennsylvania in the 1800s. That's bad for China, good for us. But if Biden decides to stop fracking and stop the oil leases and shut them down and make us switch to windmills and start paying 4 or 5 times as much money for our electricity per kilowatt hour as we do now, and that's what happened to that giant solar plant out in Las Vegas. Right next to it is the hydroelectric plant from Hoover Dam that allowed Vegas to exist in the first place. That is a product of the 30s, I think, engineering. Super cheap, very effective, very reliable electricity. Just a couple miles down the road, the biggest solar collectors in the world, their electric cost is 3 or 4 times what it is coming out of Hoover Dam, and they constantly need government subsidies to stay in business. So our ability to innovate will continue to degrade. California is a great example of that. California shows what regulations do. You can't start 20 years ago. Steve Jobs said you couldn't start Apple again in California. 20 weeks ago, or whatever it was, Zuckerberg said you couldn't start Facebook in California. But you're about to get California government, whether you like it or not. Kamala Harris and all the rest of them, these are the people that have destroyed the state and so on. And I think the important thing to remember about the idea of a Biden or Harris presidency is not that they're Chinese puppets. This is an important distinction to make. They're not Chinese puppets to the degree that the Chinese are telling them what to do. That's an understandable kind of an emotional conclusion, but it's simply not true. They are not Chinese puppets. They just have the same desires that China does. They're ideologically aligned with China. They love the idea of an extremely powerful state that centrally plans the economy and forces people what to do. That's what progressives are all about. That's why they love dictators so much, why they're in love with Castro and in love with Stalin and in love with Hugo Chavez and all the rest of these murderers and tyrants. They love it. So they're not taking orders from Beijing. It's not somebody's calling up and saying, okay, President Harris, today I want you. No, they don't have to do that. They both have the same objectives. They want the state to control wealth creation. They want the middle class to disappear because the middle class is a threat to them. And they want an army, a nation of workers and proles, and an extremely small elite of which they are members at the top of the hierarchy. That's what they want. And that's how it's going to happen. It's not going to be like they're going to get their orders. So I don't want to take all day with this. We're running out of time. So economically, I'd still put the money on America because I think that's where the innovation is. China has an enormous disadvantage that comes with their enormous advantage. They have a very homogenous society. That means they're very hardworking. They're very patriotic. I respect that. They're very dedicated to the idea of the state. But because they're so homogenous, there's no motion, there's no collisions, there's no combination of ideas under incredible pressure that America provides, the pressure of innovation and all this other stuff. Where somebody knows how to do this, and you got peanut butter in my chocolate, well, you got chocolate in my peanut butter, and oh hey, that doesn't happen there, and it can't happen in a society that homogenous. There's not enough difference of opinion from a cultural viewpoint to generate real innovation the way that it's generated here. That's why it continues to be generated here. Those are all good for us economically, but again, it is a powerhouse, and their educational system is extraordinary. They put out more, they graduate more engineers, my understanding, in a year than we graduate students, and they're far better educated. And that is going to catch up with us very fast. On the scientific front, everything that China has achieved, with one exception, appears to be basically stolen American technology or European technology and basically just employed in a manufacturing sense. And the one exception to that is that I've heard a few weeks ago that China has a functioning quantum computer. And folks, a quantum computer is a topic for an entire show, but a quantum computer is not like, gee, this is a better computer. A quantum computer makes a digital computer as we know it look like an abacus. A quantum computer can solve in an afternoon a problem that the fastest traditional computers might spend the rest of the universe working on. I know that seems impossible to believe, but you're going to have to believe me on this. And if China has a working model of a quantum computer, I know we're working on them too, but if that is a technology that we cannot allow China to get ahead of us on. That is absolutely critical technology. In the cultural field, I don't see anything that China produces that the world wants. Not only that we don't want, but that the world wants. Mulan completely cratered. All of these movies that you can tell are paid for by China have just done terribly, not only in our own box office, but also around the world. And that's because there is no Chinese dream. There's an American dream. People all around the world know what it is. My wife grew up in Russia. She grew up in the Soviet Union and then grew up in Russia. And she knows what the American dream is. And everybody knows about rock and roll, motorcycles, hamburgers, and rebellion. And everybody likes those things. Nothing like that coming from China. We're not playing Chinese artists on the radio. It's just simply not on our radar culturally. So we still seem to be pretty secure in that position. So that's economically, culturally, scientifically. Militarily is where the real money is on this one. And I'm still going with the U.S. on this, and I still think we have enough of a lead to suffer the setbacks that we're going to see under a Biden-Harris administration. The Chinese aircraft carrier and the jets that fly off of it are a public relations stunt. I say that with a fair amount of confidence. They had a couple of jump jet, ramp carriers, and then they have a flat deck carrier, and they're going to be building some more. But there's two things about those carriers. First of all, the airplanes don't have enough thrust to take off from the deck and carry any bomb load for any distance, which is a disadvantage in an aircraft carrier if you think about it. And more importantly, what the Chinese Navy, it's not the Chinese Navy, it's the People's Liberation Army Navy. What they don't have is they don't have 70 years of experience operating a carrier air battle group. A carrier surface group with its attendant air wings is a miracle. It's a miracle of sophistication and cooperation, technology, guts, hard work, all of it. And they have nothing like this, nothing like it. And they're not likely to get it anytime soon either. I don't think they'll ever get it because, frankly, the part that makes Americans' military so powerful is not the money that we spend on it or our weapons, the fact that we trust our people, that a sergeant or a private can call in an airstrike on an enemy position, doesn't have to go back and report to Beijing to get permission. We have 19-year-olds parking 30, 40, well, now in the case with the F-22s, I'm sorry, the F-35s, now we have people parking a $100 million jet within 6 inches of the side of a floating steel island. And China can't produce that. They will over decades, but they don't have it now, and they're not likely to get it anytime soon. Their destroyers are pretty good. But again, I've talked to members of the U.S. Navy, and they say that their doctrine and their procedures are way behind us. And the one thing that I find extremely encouraging militarily with regard to the Navy and China is, and very, very encouraging, is that the United States is taking a very aggressive lead in unmanned ocean-going vehicles. Unmanned submersibles, unmanned surface vessels. We can crank those things out. We have far superior technology in terms of the control systems necessary for that. We've been flying Global Hawk. I don't know how long Global Hawk's been flying, 10, 15 years now. Takes off from Los Angeles, and they basically say, fly from Los Angeles, hover over Sydney for 4 days, and then come back and land in Alaska. And it does it. They don't have that yet. They're working on it. But the ability for us to manufacture a series of inexpensive swarms of surface and undersea drones should go a long way here. Nothing they have compares to American nuclear attack submarine technology. And China is building a blue water navy, but they're a long, long way behind our blue water navy. Although we're going to see cuts in that navy, and we're going to see cuts and overextension of the U.S. Navy that's already going on. We're going to see China continue to build this string of islands that they're going to claim as their territory, and then claim exclusion zones around that territory. And they're going to basically try and form an entire chain-link fence around the South China Sea and be able to cut off trade between Japan, Korea, and the rest of the world. They're going to claim that those islands are their territory, and you can't sail through them. They're doing this already. Donald Trump did what Barack Obama didn't do and should have done from day one. The day that the Chinese say you cannot come within the international boundaries of this island that we're creating out of thin water is the day we should have had a naval parade of 7 or 8 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and their entire airborne fighter and bomber wings overhead in a constant circle around one of those islands for a day or two, with at any given moment 500 or 600 aircraft in the sky directly over their island. That's what we should have done, and that's what we will not do under a Biden administration. We can expect the Biden administration also to do the kind of things to destroy military morale that Obama did, and that is prioritize things like gender equality and have the greenest Air Force base in the country, and have our special forces guys no longer out there training to defend themselves against enemies and protect this nation and go out and achieve what this nation needs to achieve in silence sometimes. They're going to be spent more and more time inspecting tattoos that people who are transgendered might find offensive or sensitive. We're going to see a lot more of that. That's the thing that scares me the most is the cultural pressure that we're going to see on the U.S. military. Obama basically didn't have to cashier all of the patriots and the warriors during his 8 years. All he had to do was make being in the military intolerable for a person with any sense of honor and patriotism. He made it intolerable for them. And thousands of them left, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands perhaps, highly, highly disciplined, highly qualified, and most importantly, highly experienced, irreplaceable human capital, driven out of the military by things that honorable warriors simply won't abide by, like having an order saying you have to go and I heard this order directly from a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. It was a Green Beret colonel who said, I got a direct order saying you have to go to your men and you have to ask them how many weapons they have at home, what kind of weapons, and how many. And he simply said, sir, I'm not going to obey that order. I will not obey that order. And that's the kind of thing that protects this country. But he's not in the Army anymore. And that ought to scare the living daylights out of you. We have such an enormous advantage over China at the end of 2020 that we might, and I think likely will, survive 4 years of terrible, terrible, terrible loss, not only of potential position, but loss of existing position. We're going to lose a lot of ground in these next 4 years, a lot of ground. But I don't think that China has the intellectual chops, the cultural chops, or any of that to become dominant militarily in the way that they want to be. So they'll continue to revert to unconditional warfare, like, well, I don't know, some kind of global pandemic, let's say, or maybe spending hundreds of millions of dollars to interfere in another country's election process. That's how China looks to me at the end of 2020. And we'll see how much of this comes true in the years to come, the weeks to come, months to come. We're going to be here for the whole thing. And for those of you who've made either one-time donations, let me just speak to you very briefly. Those of you who've made one-time donations, I cannot express my gratitude to you. You've taken an enormous amount of the ongoing pressure of running this business off. We're no means out of the woods yet, but at least I'm not having to take money I made doing the Apollo series and put it into BillWhittle.com to keep it running, because people like you have stepped forward, and I've had a $1,000 donation on a one-time donation, and I've had a $2 donation, and I treat them both with the same exact amount of gratitude and deep, deep appreciation for you stepping up and helping to keep this country free and keep these messages coming. We've also had an enormous increase in the number of members, and we're very, very happy to have you. And that's why we're doing this show every single day, 5 days a week, and we're going to continue to do that too. If you haven't done either one of those things, we sure could use your help. If what you heard here about the future of this country relative to adversaries that are already at war with us, in which the incoming administration is welcoming with open arms not only China but Iran and all the rest, then the road to recovery is the dispersal of information and perspective, and that's what we try to do here. So if you're not a member or haven't made a one-time donation, we certainly could appreciate the help. Just follow the link that's below this video, and off you go. We will see you right here tomorrow, Thursday, Christmas Eve. I have no idea what we'll talk about then, but hopefully it'll be interesting. Until then, thank you again for the people who've made donations and to the members at BillWhittle.com. And we'll see you tomorrow right here on Going Home to America. Moving back to America.